Welcome everybody far and near. Thank you for joining us again for the last of our series. We'd had 4 weeks, this is the 4th week, on the subject of the Torah as Shira, the Torah as poetic, the poetic quality of the Torah. And with this last class, we come to the end of the book of Exodus, and we come to some kind of resolution of the agony that suddenly attacked the people without any warning in last week's Parsha, in Parashat Kitisa, the agony that we call the sin of the golden calf. Something untoward happened suddenly. And suddenly there was a sin, there was a golden calf, there was idolatry. It's high drama, but there's a sense that 120 days have passed now, and Moshe has prayed on the mountain three times 40 days, 120 days, which brings us up to Yom Kippur, and the end of last week's Parsha, the end of Kitisa, has Moshe coming down the mountain triumphant and radiant with light, so that it's hard to look at him. The people move away, Vayiru ha'am, and the people recoil because of the light on his face. That is, there's something, if I can be a little fanciful here, but the Torah invites it. The last time the people saw Moshe face to face was when from the back, was when Moshe left them after the giving of the Torah, and he went up to the top of the mountain to be swallowed up by the Esh Ochelet, the vision of consuming fire at the top of the mountain. And so he has to find his way in the fire, in that fire. But now we see him coming down and we see his face, and it's as if, this is my fanciful suggestion, it's as if some of that fire has entered him. And now he actually radiates. Karan or panav, the skin of his face. It's very physiological. You know, the skin is radiating. It's not just a general halo. It's the body. The body is radiating. The face is radiating. And the people are overawed, and then Moshe speaks with them, and they draw closer. And then he veils his face, and it's not so clear when he veils it, when he doesn't veil it. It's a mystery. And suddenly we now have a very down-to-earth Parsha. Vayakhel, Moshe, and Moshe gathered together the whole community of the children of Israel, and he began to give them commandments. And the main burden of this whole section is, of course, to convey to them the original commandments to build the Mishkan, to build the tabernacle. It's as if those commandments were given before the sin of the golden calf, right, way back in Parashat Truma, many weeks ago. But they were held in suspension, and they were not conveyed to the people because of what I'm calling the agony that has suddenly taken over the people, and something that has to be resolved. And now it's a sign of its resolution. The resolution of that agony of the golden calf is the fact that now Moshe can pass on to the people as a practical instructions those commandments of how to build the Mishkan in order to fulfill God's promise, demand, plea, v'shachanti b'tochan. And then I will live among them. If they build a place for me, then I will dwell among them. Now, this has often been taken as a result of, that is, the fact that those original commands that happened before the golden calf, the fact that they can now be released into the public sphere and they can become reality tells us that people have been forgiven, and a sense of resolution. So you have a sense of closure right away. As soon as those commandments are publicized and acted upon, that in itself is the beginning of the final resolution, where the glory of God will fill that structure that they will make with such very great communal and artistic effort, and that's what I want to talk about today. And in some way, that agony has been resolved. You could put it very simply and say, I think I came across this somewhere, that at the heart of this Mishkan is the Aron, Habrit, how do we call it? The Aron, the Ark the Ark of the Covenant, and into that Ark will go the new Luchot, the second edition of the tablets. And so Moshe coming down the mountain bearing the second set of tablets, and now they're going to find a home in the people's making, in the work of the people's hands. So that's already a kind of poetic perspective on the very dry details that follow of the actual construction of the Mishkan, of the different parts of the Mishkan, and the kind of work that's required, and the kind of materials that are required, and so on. Now, that's the general scene. But the interesting thing here is that unlike when God gave the original commandments to build the Mishkan, there's another commandment that's immediately prefaced to the Mishkan. Before we can get to the Mishkan, we're all agog to hear about the Mishkan, but before we can get there, there are 3 verses slipped in there about Shabbat. As if that really is the most important thing that has to be given to the people at this point. That was not the way God put it originally when he was talking to Moshe. When he talked to Moshe, first he gave the commandments of the Mishkan, all the instructions, and then afterwards he said, "V'ach et shabtotai tishmoru." But, however, very strong ach. However, in spite of the Mishkan, and that's the first real point I want to make, that there is a kind of radical tension between Shabbat and the Mishkan. So when God gave the commandments to Moshe to start with, he gave the commandments for the Mishkan, and then before they separate, he says to Moshe, watch out for Shabbat. The making of the Mishkan doesn't override Shabbat. So Shabbat has to be observed. And there's a kind of tension there. Ach, rak. There's a kind of strong, however, nevertheless. Here, when Moshe tells the people, Shabbat is put in first. Higdim Moshe, Rashi says. Moshe was very careful when he's telling the people, Higdim lahem azharat Shabbat. He put in the warning about Shabbat before he ever gets to the Mishkan. And there are 3 verses about Shabbat. Have a look at Rashi. I'm not going to read the verses. Actually, perhaps I'll just sort of go through them quickly in English. He gathered all the people together, and he said to them, these are the things that God has commanded to do. You're expecting the Mishkan, perhaps, to make the Mishkan. No, la'asot et Shabbat, which is also, the word for Shabbat is also to make Shabbat. It's a creative act of some kind. 6 days work shall be done, and on the 7th day shall be sacred, a Sabbath of Sabbaths to God. Anyone who does work on it shall be killed. You shall not burn fire in all your dwelling places on the Shabbat day. That's it. Right? That's the end of one chapter, the beginning, the end of one Parsha, small Parsha, and then we move on to the Mishkan. This is what God has commanded again, and take donations from people, everyone whose heart moves him, prompts him to give, and they will bring all these donations, silver, gold, silver, etc., etc., etc. But Shabbat comes first here, because the Egel has happened in the meantime. As if the fact that the golden calf has happened changes the order of things. And from this, maybe we can learn something about the nature, the problem of the golden calf. What was it? I have to say that I feel a little bad that it really is not appropriate that in the way that our four sessions have worked out, we've just managed to miss that agony. Right? The agony was last week, and we didn't meet last week. So in a way, if you were to depend only on what you're getting in class here, you wouldn't know there was an interruption, that there had been an egel somewhere there in the middle. There hadn't been a golden calf. And here now, what we have, look at Rashi now. Rashi now is what I have here is Rashi on the first moment. It's a little confusing, but I hope it won't really make a big difference. When God had given these commandments of the Mishkan, in number 1 on your page, it was on chapter 31, verse 13. He had said to Moshe, and you now speak to the children of Israel. And you, why the emphasis on you, Moshe? Even though I have charged you to charge them, to command them about the building of the Mishkan, the work of the Mishkan, let it not be light in your eyes to push away, to thrust away Shabbat, in the face of that work. Now that's an inelegant but literal translation. It shouldn't occur to you, even though you, Moshe, have been given this important charge of moving the instructions for the Mishkan into reality, as if that is now what your most important function now. Don't let that in any way blur your sense of priorities. Afal pi, afal pi, afal pi. Several times over that expression, even though, in English it's a little less strong than in Hebrew, I think. Even though there is the serious work of the Mishkan, and you, Moshe, are feeling particularly conscientious about that now, don't let that override. Don't let it go to your head. Don't let it. There's a sense here of more than just don't forget about that other commandment of Shabbat. It's not a cognitive matter. It's a matter of somewhere, I want to say, it's a matter of fire. No fire on Shabbat. No fire, no burning of fire, no kindling of fire on Shabbat. That's the one thing we're told out of all the laws of Shabbat, as if that is in a way the radical, that's the root of the laws of Shabbat. Shabbat has to do with lishbot, not to do, not to create, no fire. And fire has something to do with creation and with destruction as well. If you look at the rest of Rashi, right, the next one at least, Ach et Shabtotai tishmoru. This is Rashi on the original instructions for the Mishkan. However, Ach, afal pi shetihiyu rudufin v'zrizin b'zrizut hamelacha. That expression always haunts me. Even though you are going to be rudufin v'zrizin, you are going to be burning with zeal. You're going to be compelled. There's going to be a compulsive sense in Rudufin. Rudufin means pursued. You're going to feel haunted. You're going to feel so caught up in the eagerness to create the Mishkan in creative fire, let's say. Right? Just tossing things out now. We'll see. You are going to be burning with the creative desire to build the Mishkan and, of course, to resolve the sin of the golden calf thereby. So it's going to be burning in you, even though, don't let that ignore that the essential tension that there is, Shabbat al tidche. Don't push away Shabbat. Now, lidchot et Shabbat, in legal terms, if something is doche, something else, it means to override, it means to take precedence over. But the actual word lidchot means to push, to thrust. It's a kind of aggressiveness, where something that has a lot of force pushes something else out of its way. The Mishkan is going to have such force for you, that zeal of creative consummation, to bring something to consummation. At this point, what always comes to my mind is the experience of a friend of mine who came to Shabbat late in life and who writes poetry. And she described how hard it was to leave her study. She's in the middle of trying to work something out. The fire is burning. It's not resolved yet. She's in the middle. And she has to come downstairs and light the candles. As if the candles are like that fire and unlike that fire. There's something in common and something deeply, there's a tension between the two. And then there's a generalization of the use of that word ach. Ach is lema'et, to exclude Shabbat from the general order of work of the Mishkan. Shabbat you have to take off. Shabbat doesn't belong to the Mishkan, right? It's a day off. It's a day out of that world of the Mishkan. That's as much as I want to point out here. And then to go to the Sforno in number 2. The Sforno in number 2 has really a conceptual notion here of the tension between Shabbat and the Mishkan. So what does he say here? Lo teva'aru esh, you shall not kindle fire, on that verse in our Parsha. Afal pi, right, there is that afal pi again. even though burning in itself is usually destructive, fire is a destructive medium. You're going to have to strain yourselves to follow the logic of this. Even though it's usually destructive, nevertheless, michol makom, since it is a means for all the work, or most of the work that is done in the Mishkan, all the different kinds of crafts and artistry that was practiced in the Mishkan, since fire turns up in let's say most of the work. You know, I don't know. I haven't done a full study on which of all those kinds of artistic production really required fire, but a good number of them. So he generalizes here. Fire is how you create. You create artistic objects. Right? Even though it's mostly destructive, since it's also creative, it's forbidden on Shabbat. Now, do you get the paradox of that? If it were only destructive, it would be allowed on Shabbat. But you're not allowed to do on Shabbat. You have to do Shabbat. You have la'asot et Shabbat, not to do the creative things of the Mishkan, to create that. And so it's the creativity that's the fire, that's the problem. Destruction, it's all right, we can take that in our... Maybe we could say it's the combination of the two. You know, it's the complexity of fire, that it both, you know, it's death and resurrection. It's the phoenix and the fire. It's the sense of things coming to an end and things coming to life again. And it's the creative aspect that is the problem, that doesn't allow you to do the work. Which, and these are, of course, as you may know, the 39 kinds of work that classically we observe, you know, we avoid doing on Shabbat, are precisely the kinds that were commanded in the Mishkan. So there you have that complete, you know, collision of two things that seem to have nothing in common with each other, in a sense. Except that they do, except that there is fire in both cases. And this is part of what we want to explore today. Where can you see the fire right away in the creative work of the Mishkan? So again, slightly fanciful idea, but perhaps not. Is the response of the people. As soon as Moshe produces that list of different kinds of work that need to be done, there's the gold and the silver and the spices and different kinds of materials. It needs artists, craftsmen who are specialists in all these different kinds of materials, and it needs people who have these precious materials somehow, that they possess them and will donate them to the Mishkan. And what happens? Immediately there is a flurry. There is a flood of giving. People can't be held back. Vayaviu, vayaviu, vayaviu. The causative form of the word to come, to bring. People bring. They bring all the materials and they bring themselves. The artists and the craftsmen volunteer. Now, as we'll see fairly shortly afterwards, we will see that's not a simple matter. What kind of artists and craftsmen were there among the people after 400 years dealing in clay and cement and you know, the coarse materials of brick building? You know, where was there any kind of tradition of the arts among the people here? And yet there's a flood of people who come. First of all, to bring the materials. And that flood has to be held back in the end. People, and the word goes out, the people, marbim ha'am lehavi, the people are bringing so much that it's too much. Dayam v'hoter. It's excessive. So it's a sense of excessive fire. Something is burning here. It's a fire of nedivut. You know, it's a fire of wanting to give and a kind of generosity. And, right? It's the libido, I would say. Somewhere. It's a libidinal flood. And once it's too much, Vayakhel ha'am mihavi. So the people are held back from giving any more. And that word Vayakhel to my ear also sounds a little, if I hear it not just as held back, but something to do with kele. You know, the people are kind of, they're told very strictly, no more. There's such a thing as too much. Okay, so there's such a thing as too much fire. That's the first thing. And then I want to move on right away to the strange midrash that follows. And this is one that I've always found very intriguing, and I've never quite managed to resolve in my own mind, but here we are, number 3. When it came to the golden calf, right, the people broke off their golden nose rings, they broke off these golden jewelry they had, and all the people, the whole people, gave Moshe their gold until he had to tell them, Dayechem. That's quite enough. Stop right there. It's just too much. So Moshe rebuked the people. And he rebuked them in the words, V'dei zahav, and enough gold. Enough gold, it becomes the name of a place that they passed through. And it's a kind of reminder to the people that they had to stop giving that sinful gold, the gold for a sinful purpose. What is this like? And here is a parable. It's like a young man who came into town and he saw people collecting money for charity. They said to him, give, and he gave until they had to tell him, stop. He walked on a bit, and then he saw other people collecting money for teatron. Teatron is a licentious project. It's, you know, the music halls, I don't know what the contemporary expression for it would be, for an evening at the bar. And they're collecting money for the teatron. They said to him, give, and he gave, until they had to say to him, stop right there, dayecha, that's enough. That's how Israel gave gold to the golden calf until Moshe had to say to them, stop. There's no evidence in the text that Moshe ever said stop, other than his later naming of the place as Di Zahav, enough gold. So that's actually not in the text of the Torah. That's sort of, it's a development in the Midrash. And they also gave gold to the Mishkan until they had to be told enough. And that is in the Torah. And the material for the work was sufficient and too much. V'hoter, dayam v'hoter, for the work. So we have a very generous young man here. We have a young man who is rather indiscriminate, I would say, in his givings. He is full of the desire to give gold. Whoever asks him, doesn't first this, then that. And in the end, God says, let the gold of the Mishkan come and atone for the gold of the golden calf. And this is the problem, as I see it. What is the illogic? What is it that doesn't work in this midrash? When it comes to the golden calf, right, the golden calf was the sin. It came first. After that, they atoned for their sin by giving the same material to the building of the Mishkan. That's the normal understanding of the sequence of things, the timing of it. But what happens in the mashal? What happens in the parable? Our young man encounters, just so happens, he encounters the charity collector first. And then he walks on and he then encounters the lowlife, the dissolute project. That's not the way tshuva goes, is it? First you do the good thing and then you do the bad thing. That's not called tshuva. That's not repentance. It's really a matter of timing, isn't it? First you give to the bad object, and then there is the good object, and that makes up for, in a way you wouldn't need God to come and say, let the gold of the Mishkan come and atone for or cover, yechaper, cover over the sin, if it had happened in the right order. Now, apparently it happens in the right order in the Torah, but in the parable it doesn't. And in many Midrashic versions, it's a little complicated, but I think we can do this. In many Midrashic versions, the order is indeed reversed. That the Mishkan is first commanded. When the Mishkan is commanded, there is already an understanding that the golden calf is the purpose of the Mishkan. It may still be to come in reality, but it's already somewhere on the books. What else is the Mishkan for but to atone for? So there was no original idea of the Mishkan as a great privilege. The Mishkan was there only to atone. But the instructions are given before. The instructions are given before like the young man giving to tzedakah before the ego. What are we to say about this? It seems that the logic of the story, which should be, first I think of the traditional English novel, Emma. Jane Austen's Emma. First, she's in love with, let's say, the bad one, the bad object, Frank Churchill. Has anyone read Emma here? No, not one? Oh, thank goodness. You can stay. Please come again. She's in love with this, charming rake of a person who turns out to be thoroughly disreputable. And afterwards, she realizes that this uncle figure, whom she's always found boring and a little bit restrictive, Mr. Knightley, is her true love, the perfect union. When she realizes the good object, the bad object never existed in her mind. She says, I never was really serious about him. That was nothing. I always knew Mr. Knightley's superiority over everyone else in the world. Now, that's what happens in closure. When you achieve closure, then you only focus on what you have now discovered, and everything else becomes nothing. That's the way you construct the world. That's the world of tshuva. That's the world of repentance. You say, that was not serious. Now, did she ever really love Frank Churchill? If you look at the description of her relationship to Frank Churchill, it depends what you mean by really love. It was certainly a strong thing. It wasn't nothing. If you go back and read, it was a very strong thing. Call it infatuation, but that's you talking. That's the outsider who's saying, oh, that really won't do. But in actual experience, it's more like our young man, who has so much to give, and who in a way almost leaves it to a matter of chance. This comes first, all right, so I give everything to this, and then I give to that. Yavo zahav. Let it come, says. It's that form of the verb that's called the jussive form. Let it be. Yavo. It's not future, it's just, may it be so. May it be, God says, that the good object covers the bad object and not the other way around. And we don't want to come to the conclusion that this person is a kind of recurrent delinquent, that she's going to follow the good object up with more bad objects. So we want to say, let it be like this. And that's the way we create the world. So Nelson Goodman, the cognitive psychologist, has a book on world making, in which he says this, that we all live in a world that is nothing till we make it. We create its order of priorities. We create what should cover for what is more important than what. And then we banish totally everything that is irrelevant. We just decide what are the peaks and what are the lows of our existence, what is the ground and what is the figure, what is in front and what is behind. And in some way, the artist in creating is doing the same thing. He's using sometimes sheer illusion. In fact, all of it is sheer illusion. He used thick gobs of paint to convey the light of the sun. Turners, sunsets. Thick gobs of paint, so thick that you could see them from the side standing out like an embossed shield. Coarse and nothing to do with light. That's what creates the illusion. It's that creates the world. And so the question is now, what kind of world is to be created now? And God is saying, let it be like this. It's almost God's prayer. May it be that what I think are the good objects will cover over the other ones. That's God's wish. But in terms of the actual experience, perhaps there's more to ask. Perhaps there may even be a similarity between the giving, for instance, the sense of indiscriminate desire. These are the sense, perhaps, of, I have a phrase here that I rather like, the inherent instability of desire. It's not my phrase, D.A. Miller, literary critic, uses it. the inherent instability of desire. You know, we're very proud of ourselves when we're giving to good objects, but maybe we're very much in flux. There's no guarantee that the next moment we won't be elsewhere. That's how the egel is not a one-time affair. The egel will continue to haunt the people throughout Sefer Vayikra, right? If we were continuing, then we'd be talking about that. But there is that sense that the egel is not resolved so simply. God says at one point, immediately after the golden calf, he says, and it will be on the day when I pay back for the people's sins in that particular time, I will also pay back a little bit of the golden calf. As if to say that the golden calf, certainly the punishment for the golden calf, will be in relays. It'll be in what's the word I want? Installments. It'll be paid by installments. That's a kind of act of grace. But more serious is the idea that the golden calf itself is something that will always be with us. That somewhere, that fire, it's too similar to the good fire to be easily, well, that's the end of that. It doesn't work like that. The egel is not resolved entirely. Now, if I move from there, I want to move to the next midrash on your page, which is about the making of the Mishkan. Bezalel as the master craftsman of the Mishkan. Number 4. Ru'u, Moshe says to the people now in our Parsha. He's talking to the people and he says to them, Ru'u, see. An interesting way of starting a command. Look. What? Wherever do we have that? The interesting thing also is that's exactly the way God had put it when he was giving these instructions to Moshe. He had said to him, Re'eh. Re'eh has a sense of titpal'u. When I say, be amazed. Can I put it like that? Wake up. Do you realize how extraordinary what I'm going to tell you is? Wake up at this point. Ru'u, Re'eh. See, Kara Hashem b'Shem, God has called by name. God is here. This is Moshe talking to the people. When God was talking to Moshe, he said, see, I have called my name, Bezalel ben Uri ben Hur, and that I'm going to fill him with a spirit of wisdom and understanding and knowledge. Right? Chochmah, binah, dat. There's a certain sense of wonder about all this. And what does the Midrash have to say? That Ru'u is paralleled in the prophet Yeshayahu, where God says, Hine anochi barati charash. Behold, I have created the smith, the goldsmith, let's say. Someone who works in fire, someone who works in metals and fire. I have created the smith, and so the Midrash then comments, Ze Bezalel. When Isaiah says that, God's God claiming that he has created a special creation of his is the man who works in fire, the Midrash says that is Bezalel. God is priding himself somewhere here. He is luxuriating somewhere in the idea that, Bezalel comes directly from me. Let's see how the parable works out here. What is Bezalel? Nofeach be'esh pecham, the one who works who blows the fire of the coals. Yeah, someone who works to keep the fire burning bright. Israel sinned in fire, as it says. I threw the gold into the fire. This is Aaron giving a rather weak excuse for his participation. I threw it into the fire, and this calf emerged, Vayakhel, as if it had some life of its own. It just popped out of the fire. I had nothing to do with it. I just threw the gold in there, and Vayakhel ha'egel hazeh. So it clearly comes from fire, right? The golden calf, obviously. And then Bezalel came, and he healed the wound. Now look at the complexity of the imagery here. Bezalel is a craftsman who works in gold, but suddenly he is something else, a metaphor for that kind of work. He is a doctor, it turns out. He knows a very satisfactory dressing to put on a wound. So that's his talent. In working in gold, he's healing an illness. It's a therapeutic form of artistic activity. What is this like? Yes, like a medical student who placed a wound placed a bandage on a wound, and it was healed. And everyone praised him, for having done that. His teacher, his professor, the professor of medicine, said to them, "Kalsu li." Don't praise him, praise me. It's a kind of slight black humor here. Praise me because I taught him everything he knows. What, we have a jealous professor here? He's jealous of his student? I mean, have you ever heard of such a thing? Well, one has, yes. That's all right. But God, we don't want to say that, do we? That God is jealous of Bezalel? But suddenly there is that kind of uncomfortableness. What? What are you saying here? Behold, I have created. Look at me. Don't look at... and here, what happens then? Here, so everyone was praising Bezalel and saying in his chokhmah and his tvuna, these are the two kinds of wisdom that he is being praised for, he made the Mishkan. What's missing? In the text of the Torah, God says, I will fill him with chokhmah, tvuna, and da'at. And people don't recognize the da'at. People just recognize how very skilled he is. He's he really knows his stuff. He's read all the books, and he's got good instincts as a doctor. He's got everything you need. But they don't take account of the third thing. And here is where God says, Ani hu shibarati v'limadati. I'm the one who created him and taught him everything he knows. And we're left now to try to balance this relationship now between God and Bezalel. As it says, Hine anochi barati charash. Go back to the proof text from Isaiah. Look, I have created it says it there more clearly than it does in our text about Bezalel. It says there that actually God created Bezalel, and that's what God is priding himself on, like the professor in the image. And so when Moshe spoke to the people, therefore, Amar Moshe, Ru'u kara Hashem b'Shem. Moshe is conveying to the people what? Not that there's a man called Bezalel who will be the master craftsman. That will emerge naturally. He's conveying to them the necessity for wonder, I want to say, pele, which is the word that Ramban will use when we get onto his passage. What the word re'eh is an excited word for recognizing the unclassifiability, right? The unfathomableness of what Bezalel can do. Re'eh. Look at that. I want you to be aware of the pele that is Bezalel. That is, that Bezalel is not just your common garden, craftsman who knows how to do a little carpentry. You don't understand at all who Bezalel is. Bezalel is God-gifted. That's the way I'm evading the unpleasant implication of jealousy, that God is jealous of him. It's not that he's jealous. He's saying, don't you understand? That's mine. He is mine. What he can do has an element of mystery in it that can't be summed up just by various, a whole checklist of talents that he has. Right? That there's something mysterious, and that's me. And therefore, you should praise me. Now, let's assume that God doesn't really need praising. God needs human beings who recognize the mysterious when they see it, who recognize that da'at is something else. Da'at is not chokhmah and tvuna. There are different understandings of how these different kinds of wisdom are related to each other. Chokhmah might be book knowledge, and tvuna might be more intuitive knowledge, and da'at is something else. What is da'at? A classic understanding of da'at is the capacity to combine two things that are different. Fire, right? That's what fire can do. You can melt two metals. You can almost destroy something. It can flow away if you leave it too long in the fire. The capacity to know how to bring something to the verge of disappearing, a kind of de-differentiation. It stops being anything. It just becomes molten stuff. And then to differentiate it again and to make it into something new. In other words, to deform a given reality, a block of gold, or let's say golden earrings and golden nose rings, and make something else of it. In that sense, what comes to my mind is a famous theory of creativity espoused by Arthur Koestler. A little old-fashioned, but I think still worth reading. The Ghost in the Machine. What is this ghost in the machine? What is this? What is Tselem Elokim? What is it that's godly about us? What is it? What bit of God do we have in us? What ruach Elokim? What? And he says it's the capacity of creative people in the sciences, in the arts, even in humor, to combine two things that don't belong together. Two areas of activity, which you would never have thought of classing together, of putting together. And suddenly in an aha moment, I think he even uses that expression, a moment of pele, a moment of, whew, look what happens if I do that, if I combine. Many possible examples, but since I'm always under the pressure of time, let me just give you this example. Koestler, yes. One moment. Bisociation. Yeah, he calls it bisociation. Association is bringing two things together. Bisociation is where they're two really different things. They're binary. They're opposites of each other. Like male and female, if I want da'at, vayeda adam et chava ishto, the first use of the word da'at, knowledge, is the combination, the integration of two opposites. That man comes together with woman. When you think of everything that's arguing against it, how can that be? And then there is the pele of exactly how it can be. That's brilliant, as they say. That's quite brilliant. He gives many examples actually from scientific discovery. One that I like particularly is Gutenberg. How did he come upon the idea of the printing press? He started by realizing that it could simplify the process of having to copy out manuscripts. If you had seals like signet rings, each one with a different letter on it, and you could use that to imprint a page. But that's still extremely complicated. How could you hold them all together in the right order? And it's just very far from something that would work. Until one day he visited a wine festival in some vineyard, and he saw the use of the wine press. What pressure will do when you... And immediately the two ideas married each other, and suddenly you had signet rings in a wine press that you could set up easily, and you would have a page of text. It blows your mind. It's that sense of pele, of I could never have thought of that. And somehow, so God says, Anochi Brativ. I created that, which is not God priding himself, actually. That is God saying, you should be aware of the pele in your midst. You should be aware of what the possibility there is among you. Yeah. That's where I live. Right? In the midst of life, there is this combination, this possibility of combining opposite things. That's dat, and Koestler calls it bisociation. He quotes Poincaré, who was a great mathematician, who talked about the happy meeting of hooked atoms of thought. The happy meeting of atoms of thought, different bits of thoughts come together, and suddenly, instead of just being different with nothing connecting them, you see they actually have a little hook attached, each one to the right, and the hooks can engage with each other. And suddenly there's a possibility of bringing together things that they don't seem to belong to different worlds of discourse, different matrices, frames of reference, different sets of rules. And with this, we'll go. Now, let's have a look now at Ramban. Before we look at Ramban, I see what I would like to do first. Yes. What about that expression, that the golden calf comes from fire? Vayetze ha'egel hazeh. I threw it into the fire, and whoops, look what came out. A ready-made calf. Have a look at Rashi, the following Rashi, number 5. I said to the people, this is Aaron's story about the creation of the golden calf. I said to them, Davar echad. I just said to them one word, lemizahav, levad. It was just, I just asked, who has gold? All I said was basically gold, question mark. It was like a spark of fire, just one word. And immediately they rushed and they all broke off their earrings and they all gave to me. So suddenly there was an unexpected reaction to the spark that he threw at them, a hint of some kind, gold. And immediately they reacted. And I threw it into the fire. Lo yadati sheyetze ha'egel hazeh v'yatza. I didn't know when I threw it into the fire that this golden calf would emerge. And it did emerge. So here I was, not knowing, lo dat. I had no idea that's what would happen. And then if we go on to the next passage, you can see how that develops. And Aaron saw, right? Aaron sees what's happening at that moment. And what he sees in his mind when he sees the calf emerging, he sees, according to Rashi, that the calf emerges with a spirit of life. The calf really is prancing and leaping out of the fire. That's the way it looks. That's the gold which represents fire itself. Right? Gold itself has some of that. It's a cold fire rather than a hot fire. In the Mishkan, all the gold which is at the center of the Mishkan, Ramban says, represents fire. The center of the Mishkan, the heart of the Mishkan, is made of fire. It's made of flames in a symbolic mode. And the cold rather than the hot, right? It represents rather than being live fire there in the middle, in the midst of things. So here, what does Aaron see? He sees that it has a spirit of life in it, and then there's a quotation from Tehillim, from Psalms, in the image of an ox eating grass, right? Where people are being reproached generations later for this act of theirs, the golden calf, which in some ways still lingers even into the future. And what comes out is in the image of an ox eating grass. In other words, alive. It's a live, prancing creature that comes out of the fire. And when Aaron sees this, he sees that the work of Satan has succeeded. The devil's work has come out very, very successful. The devil has done his work very, very, very well. V'lo haya lo peh lidchotam legamri. It's a really poignant Rashi. And Aaron didn't have the mouth, he says, to push them away entirely. That is, to tell the people roundly, this is wrong, you shouldn't do this, you can't do this. He simply couldn't bring those words out of his mouth because look at the power of that thing that came out of the fire. Now the power, of course, is given by those who make it. That is it. It's for some reason, it's very alive to everyone who sees it. It comes to represent some kind of hidden desires that are, there's fire there in the people. You can't say it's nothing. You can't say it's nonsense, it's just a dead object. That's one way of mocking idolatry. Classic way is to say it doesn't have a mouth, it doesn't have ears, it doesn't move. It's nonsense, just sheer stuyot. But next midrash, which I've always found very intriguing, has Moshe asking God, why are you so angry with your people about this golden calf? After all, ein bo mamash. right? That's the classic argument. It's nothing, is it? There's nothing in it. There's no reality in it at all. How can you be angry or in some way competitive with, as if in some sense you're being threatened by, it's absolutely nothing. And then there is a parable offered by the Midrash. What is this like? What does Moshe's question relate to here? He doesn't think it was a serious sin. It's like a dignitary, I think, yes, who came home one day and found his wife fondling, there's a scholarly gloss on this in the translation, very nice, embracing the statuary figure supporting a Delphica. I don't think I troubled to look up Delphica. At any rate, it's a wooden figure. His wife is embracing a wooden figure, and the king is very angry. And the king's friend says to him, if it were potent, im hayam molid, if this figure really had any power at all, I could understand you being angry. What are you angry of a thing? It's nothing. It's a piece of board. It's a piece of wood that you're... And the king answers rather weakly, I just want her to know she shouldn't do that kind of thing. I don't like it. And it seems to me that it's a kind of naive question on Moshe's part. Moshe is just taking the rationalist point of view. And he's saying, but you're a rational God. Nothing is put out of joint. There's nothing divine that's put out of joint by this idol. So why are you bothered? But the truth is that the husband is bothered. What is he bothered by? It's alive. For his wife, it's alive. Right? My novelistic imagination, what kind of a marriage is it if she's so desperately hugging a shelf, a piece of board? There's something starved there. There's something that, right? This is her good object of the moment. It's her delusion. All right? We can call it from the sidelines. We'll call it a delusion. But that won't work to analyze the fact that actually there is a kind of jealousy here, that God doesn't like it. He doesn't like the fact that people don't love him. That in some way he has a rival, or there's something alive in terms of imagination, in terms of what the people. In terms of imagination, let's have a look at Bachelard. Bachelard, at the end of your source page. Bachelard thinks of the imagination then in relation to imagery. People think that it's a smooth connection, that to have imagination means to seize onto images and create in the mold of your images. That you're an image of something, and that's how the imagination works. But he has something much more challenging to suggest. We always think of the imagination as the faculty that forms images. On the contrary, it deforms what we perceive. It is, above all, the faculty that frees us from immediate images and changes them. Imagination is that which overcomes immediate perception, immediate memories, things that are very familiar, right? The flag of Israel, let's say. I may be on dangerous ground here. The flag of Israel, right? That, you could say, is an imaginative focus, that we can use that, that it's a dead image. It doesn't anymore really. What you want to do in some way is to change that image. If you're going to create a work of art, and not just an imitation, a replica of the flag of Israel, the Magen David, if it's going to be a work of art, and it's going to affect people as works of art do, you're going to have to deform that image. You're going to have to make changes in it so it comes alive in some way. So the idea then would be, how does he go on here? We could say, he says, that a stable and completely realized image clips the wings of the imagination. I find that wonderfully challenging. If it's fully worked out and fully logical and exactly, you can see how the connection is between the emblem and what you were trying to express, and it's all very obvious. It's just written into the material. You just take one look and you understand it. That hampers your imagination. It ties it down to the ground. All right, there you are now tied down rather than flying. You're not actually doing what imagination offers you to do. The poem, he says, is essentially an aspiration toward new images. It's moving away from the familiar ones, and we experience them as actively lyrical through their ability to renew our hearts and souls. These literary images, the poem, for instance, add hope to a feeling, a special vigor to our decision to be a person. Now, those are claims, those are assertions. In my understanding, in my experience, they are very true. That is, you can even be writing a desperate poem, a depressed poem. But if you've written a poem, there's a certain hope, there's a certain energy, because you've got something that's not obvious. You're somewhere, you have created a combination of things that's not just what was given, but something else that now creates a successful marriage that couldn't have been calculated in advance. Right? It's a result of a process that is, in a way, incalculable. Imagination allows us to leave the ordinary course of things. Perceiving and imagining are as antithetical as presence and absence. He's very, very absolute about this. Imagination, to imagine is to absent oneself, to launch out toward a new life. To imagine is to absent oneself, is to take one away from the material dimension of things and to use that as one element in something further, larger, more complex, right? Some kind of creative activity that then launches one out on a new life. Now, in my modest understanding of creativity, I mean, this is what I go through when I'm preparing a class. It's very much like that. There's something about that. Something has to happen that is mysterious and can't be counted on. If it happens, then I can face the week. I can face the week as a new person. Now, this is the wonder that God attributes to Bezalel. I'm going to fill him up with that spirit. Now let's look at the Ramban. I put two passages from the Ramban on your page. One is about our Parsha, when they actually execute the work. The other passage, okay, number 8 and 9. Number 8 is the actual execution of the work, where Ramban simply says, it's a kind of rather simple summary of the God's original speech to Moshe back in last week's Parsha. So I suggest we go straight to number 9. Number 9. Look, I have called by name Bezalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur. God said to Moshe, look, I have called him by name. Moshe said to Israel, also in the same terms, look, God has called by name. Right? We've had that already. What's this all about? Israel and Egypt were crushed with harsh labor, with chomer ulevenim, with clay and bricks. They had never learned any work to work in silver or gold or any kind of stone setting, jewels. They had never even seen artwork like that. Vehinehu pele. And so, it's a pele. It's a wonder. It's something that's hard to put into words even. Pele is something that you try to express in language, and all you can do is gesture and say, oh, look, hine. Look at that. What is the pele? That there should be among them a person who is such a great chacham. That's what they're called, chachmei lev, the artists. They are such a great sage in silver and gold and in all kinds of artwork and embroideries and everything. And even if you had such a person who had very good teachers, who were very great artists who taught him his craft, you would never find someone who is good at all the crafts. And here, Bezalel, the idea is that he can do everything, and he didn't have a teacher, and he never saw anything like it. He had no examples to go on. In other words, in terms of chokhmah and tu'unah, he had nothing to go on. All he had is this mysterious thing that God fills him with, which is called da'at. And And that somewhere means, more details there, read it for yourselves in English if necessary, that in fact working with clay and all that would have coarsened your fingers and you have less dexterity. You wouldn't be able to produce fine artwork. Nevertheless, here he is, b'chokhmah, b'tvuna, u'v'dat, to understand the secret of the Mishkan and all its parts and what it hints at. That is, to understand how to clothe in material, in matter, certain secrets that are the meaning of the different parts of the Mishkan. The forms are there somewhere to express motion, motivation. There's a fire burning there, right? The forms are not, they are the frozen form, but in order to create them, you needed fire. And the fire is the wonder. The fire is what it takes to produce these forms. And in that production, there is a sod. There are secrets, there are hints that have been responded to. So God wanted Moshe to see that wonder and to know what God was doing to Bezalel, and that Moshe should recognize that wonder, and that he should tell the people to recognize that wonder. In other words, it's not just telling the people, well, here is Bezalel, he's going to be doing it. It's awakening both Moshe and through Moshe, the people, to the fact that this is not just what we call, rather pejoratively, craftsmanship. These are good craftsmen, they follow instructions, they do exactly what they're told, and they produce a fine object. But you wouldn't call that a work of art. I think Ramban is making a kind of classic case, and it goes back to Kabbalah, to mystical sources, for something otherworldly here, which we think of in our terms as art, the work of art. That's the closest we come to it in the world, let's say, in the world that doesn't call itself religious formally. A sense of otherness, a sense suddenly of being liberated from what is present, and a sense of being elsewhere. The prisoners in the Shawshank Redemption, was that what it was called? Mm-hmm. The prisoners who suddenly hear Mozart coming out over the prison megaphones. That you have all seen, yes? Yeah. and that moment where these brutalized people, everyone stands there, feeling of an elsewhereness, suddenly a liberation of some kind. The power of art is the power of that kind of fire, and God wants Moshe to know it, because that's not Moshe. Moshe is something else. God talks directly to Moshe. And that sounds better, right? What is Bezalel? Look at the end. Look at the end. He quotes here a famous statement about Bezalel in the Gemara in Brachot, Nun Hey, right at the 2 lines from the end in the Hebrew. Just to fill in, just before that, God has said, I have prepared Bezalel when I first wrote the book of the generations of man, when I created Adam Harishon. Then there was a book of genealogies, and in that book was written Bezalel. Bezalel was planned from the beginning of time. Bezalel goes right back to the roots of things, to the radical meaning of creation. When I created, Bezalel was he was written in that book, Sefer HaYitzirah. It's a reference to that mystical book. And then we come to the last part here, the quotation from Brachot, Yodea haya Bezalel letzaref otiyot. Bezalel knew, Yodea, there's that word now which we can't read so blandly anymore. He had da'at to combine letters with which heaven and earth were created. That it's as if God knew how to do that. He knew how to take the letters of the Torah, all one jumble in the air, and he knew how to letzaref otam, to combine them together, to create meaning, to create words and sentences and paragraphs. The Torah, the world, and Bezalel had the same skill, to come into a world of letters and put them together. How do you put them together if you are a tzoref? Litzaref can just mean to combine, but what's the image behind it? What is the tzoref? You need your jewelry repaired, right? They used to have an advertisement, tzoref. I don't know if Tzoref is someone who works in fire, right? Works through heat. That is in fire, and the egel is in fire. So what can we say is the difference between them? And I'd like to call now on an English psychoanalyst artist. She was an artist in her spare time, called Marion Milner. She wrote a number of psychoanalytic books, and books also dealing with the question of art, with the question of her hobby. Once a week, she would spend a whole day painting. And she has a book called, interestingly, On Not Being Able to Paint. She doesn't say on not knowing how to paint. She's on not being able to paint, because she came to the conclusion that merely trying to copy the object as it is, as closely and faithfully as possible, that may be all very well for other forms of self-expression, but not real self-expression. If you really want to get at something that's deep within yourself, then you need, actually, she says, to look away, to absent yourself from the object. All right, you've looked at the object. Now look away and paint what the object combines itself with in your mind. That's basically her idea. It's her equivalent of Freud's idea of free association. Yeah. Free association sounds like a very bad idea. It's not a logical idea. If you want to say something cogent, then you don't free associate. If you want to say something orderly, then you look hard at the object you're trying to describe, and you try to say it as seriously and clearly as possible. But when you free associate, there you are lying down and just floating from one association to another, getting further and further away from the concrete object. And that is you. Suddenly there you are out there in the words that are coming up. You have a peh, yesh lecha peh. Suddenly you have a mouth that can foreground some things and background other things, and they're unexpected things. So she has the artistic equivalent of that, free drawing, she calls it. This kind of not looking at it. And then at the end of your page, there's a passage by her. We can look at that now. Yes. She says what happens when you doodle or you scribble something and it proves to be useless. What are useless scribbles? You think that it might develop into something, it doesn't develop into anything. It seemed almost as if at these moments one could not bear the chaos and uncertainty about what was emerging from the scribble long enough, as if one had to turn the scribble into some recognizable whole, when in fact the thought or mood seeking expression had not yet reached that stage. In other words, the useless scribble is the one that you prematurely resolve. I can't bear this its scribbliness. I can't bear its senselessness. And in that way, I foreclose. I want to close it up into something that's meaningful, and everyone will understand it, and if I have a common language, the flag of Israel, for instance, everyone understands it. The fact that everyone understands different things by it, in fact, completely different things by it, is left out of the count. Here, what she's suggesting here is that the problem of non-creativity or aborted creativity is a problem of adayin lo, not yet. It takes more time. When you work in fire, you can't be too quick and you can't be too slow. If you're too slow, you may lose the material. But if you're too quick, then what emerges from the fire is a fetish figure. It's a figure that everyone understands. The calf is very well understood in the ancient Near East, even from a historical perspective. It was one of the gods of Egypt. They've never left Egypt because that figure still burns inside them. It has all kinds of unconscious associations. It has a passion for them. And that is what pops out of the fire right away. But that's not what should emerge from the fire, for the artist, let's say. For the artist, what needs to emerge from the fire is something whose time has come, that you've been able to tolerate the senselessness of free association long enough till something real emerges, a combination of some kind, that really is self-expressive. That's an expression of something that other people may not understand at all. The result of this impatience is a sense of false certainty, a compulsive and deceptive sanity, a tyrannical victory of the common sense view which always sees objects as objects, but at the cost of something else which was seeking recognition. Something is trying to get born in the work of art. That's the secret that Bezalel knows, and therefore he can deal with his materials with sufficient patience and with sufficient awareness of something that's a dayin lo, something that's not yet, that has a kind of presence in absence for him. He can't see it yet, but he feels its impendingness. He feels that it's right. There's a sense of aspiration. I mean, that wonderful English word, aspiration. Aspiration is breathing towards something. Right? Inspiration is when you're filled with, all right? You're filled with the Spirit of God, right? So it seems a little more solid. You know, you're actually full of something. It's not so solid. When you have to then express that inspiration, bring it out, you need to aspire towards something, which means to reach out towards something that you really don't recognize yet. It's not there yet for you. And yet the instinct is that there's something to move towards, to breathe towards. Here, how does she finish here? At the cost of something else, which was seeking recognition, something that was more to do with imaginative than with common sense reality. Well, you know, it's a very easy opposition to make. Common sense, imagination. I don't like it all that much, because I think what the Mishkan comes to say is that common sense is not entirely left out of it. What does God say at the end of, right? Have a look now at number, right in this, yes. Moshe at the end, have a look at number 10, Rashi. Bezalel made all that God commanded Moshe. It doesn't say all that Moshe commanded him. Right? Wouldn't that be obedience? He made it. He's just a craftsman. He listens to the instructions and he makes according to what Moshe tells him. It says what God told Moshe. And this is very powerful stuff. It seems to be nothing of a difference. There's no difference. What it means is, Rashi says, and it's a classic Midrashic, Kabbalistic view, even things that his teacher had not taught him, that Moshe had not told him, his own mind came into accord with God, what God had told Moshe when they were alone together at the top of the mountain. That is, Bezalel knows what the real desire of God is, even though the intermediary may have changed it. That Moshe made certain changes when he was talking to Bezalel. And Bezalel knew, we can call it intuitively, he has his inner fire, seeks out what God had said to Moshe. How does he know? And Moshe is full of wonder. And how does he express his wonder? How did you know? And Moshe says to God, to Bezalel. Bezalel says, well, it's common sense, first of all. It's customary in the world. You construct the structure first, and you put the furnishings in later. Moshe, for some reason, had reversed the order. Moshe responded to him, you are right. That's indeed what I heard from God, right? I heard that from the mouth of God. And God then, Moshe said to him then, B'tzel kel hayita. Right? Just those three words. If you go away with nothing else but those three words. Were you in the shadow of God when he spoke to me? No. That you know what God was. What is the artist? The artist in this view is someone who stands in the shade of God himself. What does that mean? What's the shade? What's the shade idea? It's connected in Kabbalah with the idea of tselem Elohim. What is someone's shade? Someone's shade is, in a way, a projection of their being. Right? The shade of darkness that their light casts. Right? It's the opposite of the light of God. He must have been hiding there in the shadows, waiting there. It's a kind of intimacy. It's a sense of the reality of God expressed in the shadow he throws, let's say, on creative people. That creative people have a kind of inner sense of God's will, even though they are not Moshe and they didn't hear it in the light. They didn't hear it, word for word what God said. That's what Moshe has. But what he has is the creative genius, right, somewhere, to know what God must have said. In a way, it's just common sense. It comes down to common sense. Don't you build the house first and then put in the furniture? So he uses a very down-to-earth image for how he knows, just common sense. But that's not what Moshe understands. Moshe says, no, this is what it is to be in the image of God. Somewhere a projection, a representation of the creativity that is God. And so there's a kind of, ad hominem. Suddenly Moshe is really faced with Bezalel. And other commentaries also say things like this. The Hamek Davar, modern commentary, 19th century, says in a more practical way, he says, Moshe didn't have time to tell the artists everything, all the details that you need in order to create this structure so it should really represent all those esoteric secrets that God wanted somehow to convey into the human world. There simply wasn't time for it. Nevertheless, Bezalel knew. Nevertheless, he didn't need to be told all the details. He worked it out for himself. And so here my question comes now to a point. Does that mean he was a very good craftsman and he knew how to arrive at the one and only possible version that God would want? That God really wanted it a certain way, and he was really, in a sense, just instrumental. He had a good intuition, and he made it exactly the way it was supposed to be. In other words, nothing creative about it at all. You could imagine it like that. He had very good instructions from God. Is it like that, or can we make a case, as Ramban clearly does? How could we make a case for Bezalel as the supreme artist, as the kind of archetypal artist? And I'm suggesting the latter. And it has to do with that being in the shadow of God, being a suggestion that there's something there. It's unsayable, it's unimaginable, but God prides himself on Bezalel, and Bezalel has whatever the converse of that would be, right? What is it? It's not that he knows what's in God's mind and makes it. It's that he has the energy and the hope and the aspiration to make something that will be as close as possible of what he thinks God will want, and then has some kind of the gratification of knowing that that is indeed what God had said. It's not copying, and it never will be. Parashat Levi, a Hassidic source, has something to say about this, where the instructions for the Mishkan are followed with V'kein ta'asu. This is what you should do in all generations. You should make the Beit HaMikdash, you should make houses for God, you should make things that are exactly the same model as here. And the Parashat Levi says, no, it's never like that. It's never exactly the same. In the temple, it was not the same as in the Mishkan. There are certain differences. The altar was different in Shlomo's temple. Yeah? You can't have a creative person, a Navi, he calls it. And he thinks there are Navi'im in every generation, including himself probably. Nevuah, there is prophecy. The Rebbes had it, artists have it. That is, there are people who, in the terms of their generation and of the prevailing fiery imagery of their generation, the prophetic language of their generation, will know how to put elements together and make things that are new and can be then called continuity from that original structure. There simply isn't, it's often been noticed, there aren't enough details in the text for you to get exactly every detail right. So if you're going to emphasize it has to be a replica, then it simply can't be. There will always be self-expressive elements that will come into it, and that's what God wants. What are we to say now as we perforce we approach the end? Where do we go now? One moment. Yes. So what was what was the difference between the Egel and the Mishkan? Between the golden calf and the Mishkan, even though they both came of fire, they both came out of fire? One way you could say it would be, have a look at your source page, number 11. Yes, number 11. Yep. God says, Ra'ora'iti, I have indeed seen. At the beginning of the story of Exodus, God says to Moshe, you see with a single vision, and I see with a double vision. Shtei re'iyot. You see, for instance, already here at the beginning of the story, you, Moshe, have an image of the people coming to this place, the burning bush, Har Sinai, and receiving the Torah here. So you have a happy vision, a simple vision of the future. I have a double vision. I see they're coming to receive the Torah and then making the golden calf in that very same place. I see two opposites. God's vision goes beyond human vision. And then the imagery gets more complex. I appear with my four-horsed carriage, with my chariot led by four different kinds of animals. Visions of Ezekiel in chapter 1, mystical chariot. And then you, the people, anger me by pulling one of those animals out of context and making me angry with it, setting it up as your God. I am a complex God. I am a God who's not stable and permanent, an always dynamic God, an always developing God. Eheyeh asher eheyeh. I come under different forms are tried in different times and different situations to express me. You made me angry with that fetish figure, which is the calf. The calf had shor, right? That was the ox that was among those four animals that was round the throne of God, round the chariot of God. In other words, you travesty me by simplifying and hurrying it up and not allowing time. It's a matter of letting the material cook a little longer, seeing what naturally in your instinct joins itself to the original material, in order, in the end, to do something that is complex rather than simple and takes a long time rather than a short time. The Egel was miyad, was immediately, just popped out of the fire. The Mishkan will take a good 6 months, and then some. Right? The glory of God doesn't appear right away, even after that. Which leaves us now, if we can quickly have a look at number 12. What do these Chachmei Lev, these creative sages, these sages of creativity, what did they do in their work? The most wise of them, says the Sforno, made the Mishkan, which was Maaseh Choshev, that aspect of the Mishkan, which was weaving work, the work of the loom. And what was it? What was the miracle of that? With different forms and shapes on either side of the curtain. That is the ability to weave a curtain. Rashi says, from the Midrash, on one side a lion, on the other side an eagle, in the same place. Now, I've never understood really if that is possible or not possible. There's something amazing. Two different images produced, right, the warp and the woof, this side and the outside, in the same place. That was what the cleverest, right? You want to reduce it, because that's what the cleverest craftsmen could do. But they're not called clever, they're called chachamim. Right? These are the ones whose hearts lift them up, asher nisa'o libo, who have a kind of ascensional, it's the Bachelard, Gaston Bachelard, who talks about deforming the given image. He says it's an image that rises up. It moves upwards like a flame. All right, fire can be imagined in many ways. It's always changing. It's fierce. It can destroy. Things can be born out of it. But if you have fire in the form of a flame, and you are a poetic soul, he says, if you are a soul who dreams, then your reverie will be of the reverie of a flame that's always flickering. Right? It's not something solid that I can get hold of. It's always flickering and struggling and wanting to rise higher. It's rising above itself constantly. And it's that paradoxical power. It's the power to overcome its own death, to overcome, its burning down. Now, in the end, I suppose flames do burn down, but the burning bush didn't, right? It was not consumed. It burned, it was not consumed. So in a way, that becomes the first anti-image image. Because what does fire do normally? It's ochelet. It consumes. And this one that's what the artists are being invited into here, Bachelard will say. And there's something paradoxical and impossible about it, and that is the Pele. That's what we are dealing with. And okay, finally, number 14. Hu haya omer, Chaviv Adam, I think it's Hillel, yes? Hillel used to say, Chaviv Adam shenivra b'tzelem. Precious is the human being who is created in the image, which means in the image of God. How should I say, Chaviv. What a beloved creature that must be, who's created in the image of God. Who is saying that? Presumably God is saying that. This creature who is created in the but an exceeding preciousness, right? An overflowing preciousness. It's much more than just chaviv, beloved. It's exceedingly beloved. Noda'at lo shenivra b'tzelem. Is someone who's been made aware that he is created in the image of God. Someone who has da'at in him, no da'at lo, which is not conscious knowledge, I'm suggesting. It's unconscious knowledge, that something in him knows and can act on the fact that he's in the image of God. And what will that mean? It means enacting, what God does in some way. That is, this is someone who has something of that genius that we're calling the genius of creativity. But this is all human beings in this statement. All human beings are in this category. Everyone potentially has something of that power. We have different materials we use. We have different kind of reveries. But there's a certain discipline in it as well. It's not something that you can just count on as a talent. It's a talent, but it's more deeply, I think, a gift. It's a gift. And the question is, what can one do? What can one do with that gift? As it says, ki b'tzelem Elokim asai ha'adam. Right? We're told in the Torah that, and Noach is the first person who's actually told it. He's the the person who has to survive destruction is told, but you have in you something regenerative. You haven't. And I'd just like to add this. What does it mean to be told, somehow to be made to know, that one is like something? One is in the image of something. So just as a kind of mind game, a reverie, I remembered that I used to be told that my mother used to tell me that I was like my grandfather. Now what happens if you tell a child who has seen a photograph of the grandfather and knows that this grandfather with a venerable long white beard and a look of righteousness and wisdom on his face, an extraordinary look on his face, to be told that you're actually like him. Here is that, it doesn't work. I'm not like him. I'm just not. But once you have that germ planted in you, that is no da'at lo, becomes a kind of unconscious knowledge. And it's something that, whether you know it or not, is forming your soul in some way. Right? And I don't think it's excessive what I just said. That on some level, without actually knowing this person, I did once meet him, but in some way, he's certainly, there was a spring of some kind there. And I think that's what it means to say to no da'at lo. It's a hint. It's not teaching you and giving you commands and orders, and I want you to act like this and not like this, and I want to make you according to plan so that you should. It's just the opposite. It's something very delicate and that needs a lot of time to develop and a sense of complexity, a sense that one is not trying to achieve something very simple, but one's trying to make something whole of many different otiyot, of many different signs, right? Many different symbols in the world, many different letters, which is the poetic faculty. That's the faculty that creates something in the world. And that is, ideally, that's the experience of every man, that every human being is made in that, with that kind of germ of possibility in them. And then a work, which is the work of the Mishkan, a work of a disciplined, inflamed work with fire that can take many generations.